here is our last teeny tiny lecture. It's not that long on the Reformation, and we're going to talk specifically about the religious wars. Okay, so there are a number of land-hungry monarchs during this time. All of them are concentrated on gaining as much territory as possible. So we've got Francis I in France. Pretty easy to remember that one, right? Henry VIII in England, Charles V in the Holy Roman Empire in Spain. Again, grandson to Ferdinand and Isabella. And then we have Suleiman I of the Ottoman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire and the Ottoman Empire were really vying for power between each other. And around about 1521, we see Suleiman beginning to advance his Turkish army into Holy Roman Empire lands. By 1529, the Turks were outside Vienna, the heart of the Habsburg lands, and France also posed a problem for the Holy Roman Empire. So Charles V has his hands full. At this time, and so we see a lot of changing of alliances during this time, and we also see changing rules of warfare. By 1500, cavalry had become semi-obsolete, and infantry became the deciding factor. Gunpowder and guns became increasingly more advanced. The Spanish developed the musket, which could fire with more power and more accuracy up to 200 yards. Infantrymen carried these muskets in tight line formations, followed by foot soldiers carrying pikes. Sorry, one moment. Armies now needed strength in number. Okay, they need more people. Forces that used to be less than 50,000 were now over 100,000. New troops were volunteers. Some of them were mercenaries. Those are hired guns, basically, and draftees. During this time, we see the very first use of conscription. Okay, that's the draft, in which draftees were sent outside of their homeland. So people had been conscripted before, but they're now not fighting at home. They're going internationally. This, of course, sets a precedence that several governments have followed since then, as eventually we'll see in the world wars. Growing armies meant several problems. One, they're expensive. Not only do you have to pay them, but you have to feed them and the people that followed them. Because sometimes wives, children, prostitutes, and servants would follow armies since there was money and food readily available. Governments also have to provide troops with weaponry. They have to give them the things that they need in order to fight. And these armies were not very well disciplined. So it's expensive. And because they're not well disciplined, we have to have new rules of engagement as well as a distinction between leaders and followers. And all of that begins to come about. There are some wavering motivations during this time. To start off with, we see this being a century of religious wars, that they are fighting over some basic doctrinal issues between Catholicism and Protestantism, or Islam, with the Ottoman Empire coming in from the east. But as time progresses, wars they become to be fought for state building purposes, not for defending the faith or anything like that. Let's see. Here we are. 50 years after the Peace of Augsburg, people of different beliefs lived together without any great war in the Holy Roman Empire. There were still some tensions between Catholics and Protestants, though. In the early 1600s, a Catholic prince took over Bohemia, which is like modern-day Czech Republic, and he wanted to stomp out Protestantism there. The Protestant nobles retaliated by throwing royal representatives out of a window. No better way to say no than to throw the representatives out a window. Okay. Now the officials landed safely in a pile of manure. But we do see this claim that angels enabled them to land to safety. Really fun story. Now, this event started yet another war, the 30 Years' War. In the beginning, the Catholics saw mostly victory. In 1624, the Holy Roman Emperor raised a new army and introduced a new way of funding it. In the past, armies were funded through the spoils of war. Whatever you could find, really, you could just sort of take for yourself. However, they created a new kind of war tax levied on the princes and cities that supported the emperor. And by doing this, you have a lot more people who are involved, more financially involved in the war. And again, we see this motivation for fighting begin to change. Help had come in from outside kingdoms, giving Protestants some victories, but instead of remaining a religious war, it becomes a political conquest. For the most part, others wanted to weaken the Habsburg power, the power of the Holy Roman Empire in Spain. By 1640, the war had reached a stalemate, and all those who started the war had died. The German population in particular had greatly decreased, and the economy had suffered, and they were all just kind of done. They were ready to be completely over the war. We have several prolonged sieges, whole towns destroyed, the landscape is completely altered, there's rampant sickness, and there's little food. So, it doesn't take too long, especially, and then also think about all of the princes who are now, having to pay this war tax. It doesn't take too long to convince some people that, hey, we should end this. So the Peace of Westphalia was a series of agreements that ended the 30 Years' War. German princes won the freedom to choose their religion, but the people did not. Calvinism was included as an accepted faith, and religious boundary lines were established, with most of the North being Protestant and the South remaining Catholic. So we do have some boundaries being redrawn, and we see this as sort of the end of the religious wars that are taking place in and across the European continent. So you can see here a little map of the 30 Years' War, and some conclusions that you can kind of look over. There's sort of some major points, right? So the Renaissance thought combined with corruption within the Catholic Church brought about great criticisms, and eventually great dissension within Christianity. Now, even though many argued for reform to purify the church, religious reform wound up bringing great violence. Catholic and Protestant reformers both used violent means to ensure the teaching of their doctrine. When we study the past, we have to remember we're studying the past for the past's sake. We cannot put what we think is right and good back on them. So that's why I don't really like too much to demonize the Catholic Church, or even some of the Protestant reformers, to say, look, these are people, and they are products of their time. So we have to remember that when they are killing people for heresy, this was something that had been used in order to protect the church. When Catholic priests are fighting against having the Bible translated from Latin to the vernacular, there is a concern that the integrity of the scriptures will be violated in some way. And we can see some of their fears coming true when you see Protestantism completely breaking down, and you have all of these different people who are believing all sorts of different things, to the point to where you have people in England and in France and different places, they're having polygamous communities, and they're saying that this is right and good in the eyes of God. And you've got others who are saying, we need to, be, if you're not following the letter of the law, then we need to kill you. I mean, so let's take it all with the understanding that we have to study the past for the past's sake. So both Catholic and Protestant reformers are using violence as a means to ensure the teaching of their doctrine. the tension between Protestants and Catholics, but and because of this fervor to ensure the teaching of their doctrine, we see this tension between Protestants and Catholics erupting in a century of religious wars. And these wars produced two major results. One, state interests could outweigh religious considerations. We're starting to see a shift in having religion as the center point of everything that takes place politically, socially, everything else. We also see the state's authority beginning to increase. So very important time period, and very important events, very important people taking place. All right, so next time, in the next lecture, we will pick up with absolutism, divine right, and constitutionalism.